Imagine waking up one morning and knowing with complete certainty that you are dead. Not metaphorically dead, not emotionally numb, not going through a rough patch, actually physically, biologically dead. You look at your hands. They are rotting. You feel nothing inside your chest where a heartbeat should be, because you are certain there is no heartbeat. There hasn't been one for some time. You tell your family. They don't believe you. They look at you with frightened eyes and say, "You're right here. You're alive. We can see you." But you know better. You know what you are. You're a corpse that has somehow not yet fallen down. This is not a horror story. This is not fiction. This is a real psychiatric condition called Cotard syndrome. And the people who have it are not crazy in the way the word gets thrown around. They are experiencing something their brain is telling them is absolutely undeniably true. Welcome to Strange Psychology. Today, we're going somewhere dark. Cotard syndrome, also called Cotard's delusion or walking corpse syndrome, is a rare neuropsychiatric disorder in which a person holds a fixed, unshakable belief that they are dead, do not exist, have lost their organs, or have lost their blood. Some patients believe they are decomposing from the inside out. Some believe they have no brain. Some believe they have already died and are now in hell, simply waiting for the suffering to stop. And here's what makes it so psychologically devastating. They are not confused about who they are. They know their name. They recognize the people around them. They can tell you in calm, articulate detail exactly why they know they're dead. The delusion is not chaotic. It is organized. It has its own cold logic. The condition was first formally described in the 1880s by a French neurologist named Jules Cotard. He called it le délire des négations, the delusion of negations, because that is the core of it, negation. The patient denies the existence of things that clearly exist, their body, their organs, their life. Cotard described one of his early patients, a woman he called Mademoiselle X, as someone who believed she had no brain, no nerves, no stomach. She believed she didn't need to eat because she had no organs to digest food. She believed she couldn't die because she was, in her own words, already dead. She died of starvation. She was not suicidal. She was not trying to die. She simply believed she had no biological need that required meeting, and so she stopped meeting them. Let's look at some documented cases because this is where the condition stops being clinical and starts being deeply, uncomfortably human. In 2013, a case was published in the medical journal Neurocase about a man referred to only as Graham. Graham was a British man in his 40s who, after a failed suicide attempt, became convinced he had destroyed his brain. He had survived, but something in that survival had broken the connection between his sense of self and his sense of being alive. Graham stopped eating. He stopped bathing. He spent most of his time sitting in cemeteries because, as he explained, that was where he felt he belonged. He was drawn to dead things because he was a dead thing. When doctors finally scanned Graham's brain, what they found stunned them. His brain activity in the frontal and parietal regions was so low, it resembled someone in a vegetative state, or under heavy general anesthesia. He wasn't lying. His brain was, in a very measurable way, functioning as if it was turned off. Graham himself, when told about the scans, had only one response. He felt vindicated. Another case documented in the Indian Journal of Psychiatry involved a young woman in her 20s, a college student, who came to her family one day and told them she had been dead for several weeks. She said she had simply not realized it at first, but now she knew. She described smelling her own flesh rotting. She described watching herself from a slight distance, as if she were a ghost watching a body that used to be hers. She stopped responding to her own name because she said the name belonged to someone who was alive, and she was not that person anymore. So what is actually happening neurologically when someone develops Cotard's? The honest answer is we don't fully know, but we have some deeply unsettling theories. One of the most widely cited involves a disconnect between two systems in the brain. The system responsible for recognizing familiar things, the system responsible for producing the emotional response to those things. Normally, when you see your own face in a mirror, two things happen simultaneously. Your brain identifies the face, that's me, and your brain generates a feeling of familiarity, a sense of ownership, a quiet background sense of, yes, that is mine, I am here, I exist. In Cotard's syndrome, Researchers believe the first system still works. Recognition is intact. But the second system, the one that produces the emotional resonance, the felt sense of being alive, has gone dark. So you look at your own face. You recognize it, but you feel nothing. No warmth, no familiarity, no sense of presence. And what does the brain do when it encounters something that it can recognize but it cannot feel? It searches for an explanation. It tries to make sense of the absence. And the explanation it arrives at is, this body is no longer mine. This body is dead. I am no longer in it. This theory connects Cotard's to another condition called Capgras syndrome, which we may cover in a future episode, in which a person believes their loved ones have been replaced by identical imposters. In Capgras, the same disconnect occurs, but the person applies it to others. I recognize you, but I feel nothing. Therefore, you are not really you. In Cotard's, the person turns that same logic inward. I recognize myself but feel nothing. Therefore, I am not really me. I am not really alive. There's also evidence from brain imaging studies that people with Cotard's show abnormal activity in the default mode network. The network associated with self-referential thought, with the sense of having an inner life, with the experience of existing as a continuous self through time. When that network falters, when the brain's self-narrative begins to fragment, what remains is not chaos. What remains is silence, an interior silence that the brain interprets as death. Cotard syndrome does not typically appear in isolation. It tends to arrive alongside or in the wake of other severe psychiatric or neurological conditions. It has been documented in cases of severe clinical depression, particularly psychotic depression, in which the depressive episode includes breaks from reality. It has appeared in patients with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, brain lesions, traumatic brain injury, dementia, and certain neurological infections. It has been reported in rare and temporary forms in cases of extreme sleep deprivation, high fever, and even as a side effect of certain antiviral medications. One of the most disorienting aspects of Cotard's is that it can exist on a spectrum. At the milder end, a person might simply feel disconnected from their body, not quite believing they are dead, but not quite feeling alive either. A strange derealized quality to everything, as if they are watching their own life through glass. At the severe end, the delusion becomes total. The person does not merely feel dead, they know it, and they begin to act accordingly. In 2015, a teenager from Alabama, USA, made headlines for developing the condition, something that she strongly believes was triggered by her parents' divorce, which she'd been struggling to cope with. Haley Smith was only 14 and sitting in the middle of English class when she would suddenly be hit by a feeling she could not shake, i.e., the feeling that she was dead. Walking home later that day, she recalls having the urge to visit a graveyard just so she could be around others who were also dead. Ultimately deciding against that and returning home instead, by the time she woke up the next morning, her strange feelings were gone. Haley didn't give the weird experience any more thought until several days later, when the same weird sensations had returned again. And once again, she couldn't shake the thoughts no matter what she tried. This time, it was a spell that would last for approximately the next 3 years. As Haley herself stated, I'd fantasize about having picnics in graveyards, and I'd spend a lot of time watching horror films because seeing the zombies made me feel relaxed, like I was with family. Over time, Haley withdrew from most of her friends, who showed concern for the bizarre way she had started to act. Haley also stopped eating regular meals, figuring what was the point in consuming food if she was dead anyway. One day, however, Haley decided to confide in one of the friends who was still around, even though she feared that he was only going to think she was a freak and that she would lose him too. Surprisingly, he didn't react the way Haley had anticipated. He was actually quite the opposite. Her friend actually listened to what she had to say without passing any judgment, and he gave her the courage to think about telling her dad what she was going through as well. Haley's dad responded by urging her to see a psychiatrist, but he didn't do so in a cruel way. Rather, he was only showing concern for her well-being. Haley appreciated this, but it still would take her another 2 years before she finally mustered the strength to go speak to someone about the problems she'd been experiencing. When she finally did, however, she couldn't imagine feeling any more relieved. She received a diagnosis of Cotard syndrome, and she recalls how that alone was enough to make her feel significantly better. To know that there was actually a name for what she had, and to hear that she was not alone, that made her feel better. And unlike some cases, Haley's case would eventually get better. For this recovery, Haley would credit her boyfriend Jeremy, who she cites for his enduring support, and a more unexpected medicine, which came in the form of Disney movies. Haley describes the way that she, along with Jeremy, would consume them all: The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Sleeping Beauty, Bambi, and the list went on. According to Haley, watching Disney films gave her a warm, fuzzy feeling. To quote Haley, I asked my boyfriend Jeremy, how can I be dead when Disney makes me feel this good? And with that, over time, Haley would eventually come to feel alive again. As she would tell the Huffington Post, being a corpse was the most bizarre experience, but I'm so glad I managed to get out alive. The question that naturally follows all of this is, in the absence of devoted teen boyfriends and warm, fuzzy Disney flicks, can it be treated? The answer in many cases is yes, but it is never simple. Treatment for Cotard syndrome typically involves a combination of antidepressants, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers, depending on the underlying condition driving it. In some cases, electroconvulsive therapy, commonly known as ECT, has shown remarkable results, even in patients who had not responded to medication. ECT remains one of psychiatry's most misunderstood and stigmatized treatments. Its image shaped more by fiction than clinical reality. But for a subset of patients with Cotards, it has been the thing that turned the lights back on. Graham, the man who sat in cemeteries, did eventually receive ECT and medication. His condition improved. He described the experience of recovering as disorienting in its own way. He had been dead for so long that being alive again felt strange. He had to relearn what it meant to occupy himself. He said he felt like he had to get to know the world again from scratch. Not every case resolves. Not every patient responds to treatment. Some remain in the grip of the delusion for years. Some spend their lives in the in-between, no longer convinced they are dead, but never quite sure they are fully alive.